When Sherry told me about her 20-year high school reunion, I didn't think much of it. She was scrolling through Facebook on the couch, wrapped in her favorite blanket, with that familiar glass of wine perched on the side table. She looked up and said, "Jack, they're organizing the reunion next month. Do you think I should go?" I shrugged, focused on the game. The Knicks were losing again, but that wasn't exactly breaking news. "Sure, why not? Catch up with old friends, have a few laughs." She smiled, tucking a strand of her blonde hair behind her ear. "It might be fun. You could come too, but I know you hate these things." Sherry knew me well. I wasn't about to squeeze into a suit, stand around awkwardly, and talk about how many kids we had or how the economy screwed everyone over. "Nah, you go. Take a break. Have a good time." Looking back, I wish I'd paid more attention to the way her eyes lit up as she hit going on the event page. But at the time, it felt innocent, mundane. Just another evening in our little suburban bubble. After all, Sherry and I had been together for 15 years, married for 13 of them, and life had fallen into that predictable rhythm of work, kids, and weekend Netflix binges. The weeks leading up to the reunion passed like any other. Sherry was her usual self, organizing the PDA bake sale, juggling her real estate clients, and managing the chaos of our two boys, Ben and Tommy. If anything, she seemed happier. She laughed more, cooked fancy dinners on weekdays, and bought a new dress that hugged her petite frame perfectly. I teased her about it. "Trying to make the other girls jealous, huh?" She giggled, swatting me with a dish towel. "Maybe a little." The night of the reunion arrived, and she looked stunning. Hair styled, makeup flawless, that dress clinging to her curves in a way that made me feel like the luckiest guy alive. As she grabbed her purse, I pulled her in for a kiss. "Don't have too much fun without me." "I'll be back by midnight," she promised, winking. Midnight came and went. At 1:30 a.m., I was half asleep on the couch when the front door finally creaked open. Sherry tiptoed inside, heels in hand. Her eyes met mine, and for a split second, something flickered in her gaze. Guilt, maybe, but it vanished so quickly that I convinced myself I imagined it. "How was it?" I asked, stretching. "Good," she said, kicking off her shoes and collapsing beside me. "Everyone's gotten older, but it was fun catching up. There was an open bar, so I might have had a bit too much wine." I chuckled, wrapping an arm around her. "Lightweight." She nestled against me, and just like that, the moment passed. Life resumed its normal course: morning school drop-offs, late-night movies, and lazy Sundays. But a tiny seed of unease had taken root, and it grew quietly in the back of my mind. I ignored it at first, chalking it up to paranoia. But little things started to nag at me. Sherry was on her phone more often, smiling at texts she didn't share. She stayed late at work showing houses to clients who apparently only wanted evening tours. And then, one Saturday afternoon, while cleaning out the garage, I noticed her car smelled faintly of cologne. Not the kind I wore. "Whose cologne is that?" I asked when she returned home. She sniffed the air, then shrugged. "Must be one of my clients. They sat in the front seat earlier." I nodded, trying to push the doubt away. But the cracks were forming, and I could feel them widening. It wasn't until I logged onto Facebook that the first major clue smacked me in the face. Sherry had been tagged in a group photo from the reunion. She stood at the center, grinning ear to ear, with an arm draped around a man I didn't recognize. Tall, athletic build, that perfectly styled salt and pepper hair that guys like me could only dream of pulling off. His hand rested comfortably on her waist. The caption read, "Reunion Squad. So great to reconnect after all these years." His name was Greg, an old high school flame, I learned after some light social media stalking. He was recently divorced, had a fancy tech job in Chicago, and posted gym selfies like he was still in college. I confronted Sherry about it that night. "Who's Greg?" She laughed, waving me off. "Just an old friend. We dated in high school, but it was ages ago. He's harmless." Harmless. Sure. Still, I tried to let it go. I didn't want to be the paranoid husband who couldn't handle his wife having male friends. But then came the weekend trip. Sherry claimed she had a work retreat at a lake house 2 hours away, courtesy of her real estate firm. It didn't sit right with me. Why would a small local agency shell out for something like that? I asked her for details, but she kept things vague, saying it was just a chance to bond with colleagues. When she left that Friday morning, my gut was screaming. Something wasn't right, but I didn't have proof, just suspicions that made me feel like a fool. By Sunday evening, she was back home, acting as if everything was perfectly normal. But as we sat on the couch watching a movie, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and quickly flipped it over. My pulse quickened. "Who was that?" I asked. "Just Joy from work," she replied too casually. I didn't push further. But that night, as she slept beside me, I stared at the ceiling, knowing deep down that I was about to go down a rabbit hole I might never crawl out of. And once I started, there'd be no turning back. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flashes of that picture from the reunion. Sherry with Greg's hand on her waist, the way she clutched her phone like it held the world's secrets. I told myself I was overreacting, but you can only lie to yourself for so long before the truth starts eating you alive. By 5 a.m., I was up, sipping black coffee and scrolling through Sherry's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Nothing. She was careful, too careful. No suspicious posts, no cryptic captions. Just the usual. Pictures of the kids, recipes she'd tried, and the occasional selfie where she looked breathtakingly beautiful, like the woman I fell in love with all those years ago. I was going in circles until my thumb accidentally hovered over the search tab on Instagram, and there he was again, Greg. His profile picture, a smug shot of him shirtless by the beach, made my blood boil. I clicked on it, and the first post I saw was from the same weekend Sherry claimed to be at her work retreat. A lakefront cabin, fire pit glowing in the background. The caption, "Nothing beats reconnecting with old friends." I zoomed in on the picture, my eyes scanning every inch. Beer bottles on the porch, a pair of women's flip-flops in the corner. Then, at the edge of the frame, half of a striped beach towel, the exact pattern of the one Sherry packed before she left. I sat there, stunned, trying to piece it all together. It was too much to be a coincidence, right? But then again, what if I was wrong? I needed proof, something solid. I considered calling her out right then and there, but a gut feeling told me to wait. If she was lying, she'd only get better at covering her tracks. No, I had to be smarter about this. So I did what any desperate man would do. I snooped. While Sherry was in the shower that morning, I grabbed her phone off the nightstand. My hands were shaking, sweat pooling on the back of my neck. I unlocked it with her passcode, one I'd memorized years ago without her knowing. Her texts with me were normal, sweet, even. But when I scrolled further down, my breath hitched. There was a message thread with Greg. And it wasn't empty. I tapped it, my heart pounding so loud I was sure she'd hear it from the bathroom. The most recent text from him read, "Last weekend was perfect. Can't stop thinking about you." Her response? A simple heart emoji. I felt like someone had punched me in the gut. But it got worse. Scrolling back through the messages, I saw their conversations from the past month. At first, they were innocent enough, catching up, reminiscing about high school. Then they turned flirty. Greg, "Remember that time we skipped history class and went to the lake?" Sherry, "Haha, how could I forget? We almost got caught." Greg, "Maybe we should recreate that someday. For old time's sake." Sherry, "I wouldn't say no to that." My stomach twisted as I kept reading. They talked about meeting up, planning little getaways. My fingers trembled when I reached the part where Sherry sent him a picture of herself in the lingerie I'd given her. The same lingerie she packed for her work retreat. I couldn't read anymore. I tossed the phone onto the bed and sat down, head in my hands. This couldn't be real. Sherry, the woman who shared my bed, my home, and my life, was sending half-naked photos to another man. The shower turned off and panic set in. I grabbed the phone, put it back exactly where I found it, and hurried downstairs. By the time Sherry appeared in the kitchen, towel drying her hair, I had forced a smile onto my face and was pretending to read the morning paper. "Morning," she said, leaning in to kiss me on the cheek. Her lips were warm, familiar, but I couldn't feel them. Morning? I mumbled, keeping my eyes on the newspaper to hide the rage building inside me. She poured herself a cup of coffee, humming softly as she sipped it. How could she be so calm, so normal, when she was living a double life right under my nose? I wanted to scream, to flip the kitchen table and demand answers. But instead, I bit my tongue and played along. She wouldn't know I was onto her. Not yet. I needed more evidence, something she couldn't deny. The texts were damning, but I knew how slippery people could be when they got caught. She'd spin it, say it was just harmless flirting, that it didn't mean anything. I needed to catch her in the act. That afternoon, I called an old friend who worked in IT security. I told him I needed help tracking down my wife's GPS location history and monitoring her messages. He didn't ask questions, probably assumed I was paranoid or controlling, but I didn't care. By evening, he'd set me up with access to her phone remotely. I could see her texts, her calls, even her location. I felt disgusting doing it, like some sleazy detective in a bad movie, but I had no choice. That night, while Sherry lay asleep beside me, her breathing slow and steady, I stared at the glowing screen of my phone, watching her messages roll in. And then it happened. At 11:47 p.m., a new message popped up from Greg. Same spot tomorrow night? Sherry replied within seconds. Can't wait. I'll tell Jack I'm meeting a client. I turned off my phone and stared at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow night I'd have my proof. But as I lay there, something darker took hold of me. I wasn't just planning to catch her. I wanted revenge. The thought terrified me, but it was there, bubbling under the surface like a storm waiting to explode. By the time dawn broke, I had made up my mind. I'd catch them in the act. And when I did, there'd be no running, no excuses. Tomorrow night, everything would come crashing down. The day dragged on, and every second felt like an eternity. I couldn't focus at work. The spreadsheets on my screen blurred into meaningless numbers, the emails piling up unanswered. I kept replaying their text conversation in my head. Same spot tomorrow night? Can't wait. By lunchtime, I had hatched a plan. I wasn't just going to catch them. I was going to make sure neither of them would ever forget what they did to me. First, I needed to know where the spot was. Based on Sherry's location history, it wasn't hard to figure out. Her phone had been pinging at a small, secluded inn just outside of town several times over the past month. I pulled up the inn's website, and there it was. Pictures of cozy rooms with fireplaces, balconies overlooking the lake, and hot tubs on private patios. Perfect for an affair. I swallowed the bile rising in my throat and called the inn, pretending to be Greg. Hi, this is Greg Allen. I have a reservation for tomorrow night under my name, but I want to confirm the room number. The woman on the other end was polite and efficient, never questioning my identity. Room 207, she said. You're all set for tomorrow evening. Perfect. When I got home, Sherry was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner. She was wearing that floral sundress I loved, the one that clung to her hips and made her look like the girl I met in college. She smiled at me like nothing was wrong, like she wasn't planning to sneak off with another man in less than 24 hours. How was your day? She asked, dropping a kiss on my cheek. Busy, I replied, my tone steady. Yours? Same. I have a late showing tomorrow night, by the way. New client. I nodded, pretending to be oblivious. No problem. I'll handle the kids' bedtime. She smiled, and for a moment, I hated how easily she lied. That night, I put the boys to bed, kissed them goodnight, and then sat on the back porch with a beer in hand. The cool night air did nothing to calm the storm inside me. Sherry had already gone to bed, probably exhausted from a day of deceit. My mind was spinning. I couldn't just confront them and call it a day. That wouldn't be enough. I needed something bigger, something that would leave a mark. Then it hit me: social media. If Sherry and Greg wanted to sneak around behind my back, they could deal with the consequences of public humiliation. I stayed up late, creating a burner Facebook account and uploading the most incriminating screenshots of their texts, including the lingerie picture. I carefully edited their names and faces out, just in case things escalated legally. The caption was simple. When your wife and her old flame think they're being sneaky, but you're always one step ahead. I didn't hit post yet. That was for tomorrow night after I caught them. When morning arrived, I played the role of the loving husband perfectly. I kissed Sherry goodbye as she left for work, packed the boys' lunches, and even cracked jokes with the other parents at school drop-off. But inside, I was a man possessed. The rest of the day was a blur. By 6 p.m., I was parked a few blocks away from the inn, waiting for Sherry to arrive. I had a camera, my phone, and a baseball bat tucked under the passenger seat, just in case things went south. At 6:45 p.m., her car pulled into the lot. My pulse quickened as I watched her step out, wearing a tight red dress I'd never seen before. She adjusted her hair in the reflection of the window, then grabbed a small overnight bag from the back seat. I felt like I was suffocating, but I forced myself to stay calm. 5 minutes later, Greg's car pulled in beside hers. He got out, grinning like he'd just won the lottery, and they hugged. She kissed him on the cheek, her hands lingering on his chest. My hands clenched around the steering wheel, knuckles turning white. They made their way inside, hand in hand, disappearing through the entrance. It took everything in me not to storm in right then and there, but I had to be smart. I waited until they'd had enough time to settle in before making my move. At 7:30, I slipped out of my car and crept toward the building. The hallway was empty, the sound of my footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. Room 207. I pressed my ear to the door and heard muffled laughter, the sound of wine glasses clinking. I felt like I was floating outside my body, detached from reality. Taking a deep breath, I pulled out my phone and hit record. Then I knocked. There was a pause, followed by the sound of footsteps. The door cracked open, and Greg's face appeared, confused at first but quickly shifting to panic when he saw me. "Jack," he stammered, but I didn't let him finish. I shoved the door open, and there they were, Greg, shirtless, and Sherry sitting on the bed, her dress half unzipped. Time froze. Sherry's face went pale, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. "Jack, this isn't what it looks like," she said, scrambling off the bed. "Don't," I growled, holding up my phone. "I have it all right here. You don't get to lie your way out of this." Greg backed up, hands raised as if I was holding a gun instead of a phone. "Listen, man, let's just talk." "Shut up," I snapped. "Both of you." Sherry started crying, mascara streaking down her cheeks. "Please, Jack, we can fix this. I love you." "Love?" I laughed bitterly. "Is this what love looks like? Sneaking off to a hotel with some guy who couldn't keep his hands off you in high school?" Greg tried to inch toward the door, but I wasn't done yet. "I have everything I need," I said, waving the phone. "So don't even think about denying it. I hope the two of you enjoy what comes next." With that, I turned and walked out, slamming the door behind me. In the parking lot, I sat in my car, shaking. I opened the burner Facebook account, attached the video, and hovered over the post button. My finger trembled, but then I stopped. Maybe public humiliation wasn't the answer. Maybe I had something better in mind. After all, revenge wasn't just about exposing the truth. Sometimes it was about making them wish they had never lied in the first place. I didn't sleep that night. The adrenaline was still surging through me, my mind running a mile a minute as I replayed the look on Sherry's face when I caught them. The fear, the tears. It should have been satisfying, but it wasn't. Felt empty, hollow, like I had fallen into a bottomless pit and couldn't claw my way out. By morning, my phone had blown up with missed calls and texts from Sherry. "Sherry, please, Jack. We need to talk."
Sherry, I'm sorry.
I was stupid. I messed up. "Sherry, I love you. Please come home so we can fix this." "Fix this? How do you fix something this broken?" I ignored every message and drove straight to my buddy Mark's house. Mark had been my best friend since college. The guy who helped me move when I couldn't afford movers, who stood by me at my wedding, who once bailed me out of jail after a drunken night of bad decisions. If anyone could help me think straight, it was him. He opened the door, bleary-eyed and holding a cup of coffee. "Damn," You look like you've been through hell. I have, I said, stepping inside. He led me to the kitchen, where his wife was making breakfast for their 2 kids. You want coffee? Food? No, thanks, I said, slumping onto a bar stool. I just need to talk. Mark sent his wife a look, and she nodded, ushering the kids out of the room. He sat across from me, waiting patiently while I tried to collect my thoughts. I caught her, I finally said, my voice cracking. Sherry's been cheating on me with some guy from high school. Mark's eyes widened.
Do they? No.
I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. They've been meeting at a hotel. I saw the texts, the photos, everything. I went there last night and caught them in the act. Jesus, he whispered, running a hand through his hair. What did you do? Recorded it, took proof. I wanted to post it online, but I couldn't. I don't know what to do now. He leaned back, letting out a long breath. Look, man, I'm not going to tell you to stay calm, because you have every right to be pissed. But you need to think about what comes next. Are you planning to leave her? That question hit me like a punch to the gut. I hadn't thought that far ahead. All I'd been focused on was the betrayal, the need for revenge. But now, sitting here in my best friend's kitchen, reality was starting to sink in. We had a house, kids, a life built over 15 years. Walking away wasn't as simple as packing a bag. I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to walk out and never look back. But then I think about the boys, and I don't want them to grow up in a broken home. Mark nodded, his expression thoughtful. You need time, Jack. Don't make any decisions when you're this emotional. Stay somewhere for a few days. Clear your head. I sighed, rubbing my hands over my face. Yeah, maybe. Have you told anyone else? He asked.
No.
Just you. Good. Keep it that way for now. The last thing you need is people spreading rumors or sticking their noses where they don't belong. I stayed at Mark's for most of the day, venting and listening to him offer advice. By the time I left, I had a plan, or at least the beginnings of one. I wasn't ready to forgive Sherry, but I wasn't ready to throw everything away either. When I got home that evening, the house was eerily quiet. Sherry was sitting on the couch, her eyes puffy and red from crying. She looked up when I walked in, relief washing over her face. Jack, don't, I said, holding up a hand. I'm not ready to talk. She nodded, wiping her tears. I understand. I went upstairs, packed a small bag, and came back down. Sherry stood in the hallway, watching me with a mixture of fear and hope. Where are you going? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Mark's. I need space. Her lip quivered, but she didn't try to stop me. Okay, just please come back. For the boys. I didn't answer. I walked out the door, my bag slung over my shoulder, and drove off without looking back. That night, I lay on Mark's guest bed, staring at the ceiling. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Sherry. I didn't want to read it, but curiosity got the better of me. Sherry, I know you hate me right now, but please listen. It didn't mean anything with Greg. I was just lonely. I felt like we'd lost the spark, and I was stupid enough to think he could give it back to me. But it was a mistake. I swear it's over. I clenched my jaw, tossing the phone onto the nightstand. How many times had I heard that line in movies or TV shows? It didn't mean anything, but it did. It meant everything. I thought about our life together, the moments we'd shared, the late-night talks, the vacations, the way she used to laugh at my stupid jokes. Was it all fake? Was I blind to how unhappy she'd become? At some point, exhaustion won out, and I fell into a restless sleep. But even in my dreams, I couldn't escape the betrayal. The next morning, I called a lawyer. Not to file for divorce, but to understand my options. I wasn't going to be blindsided again. Mr. Meyer, the lawyer said over the phone, infidelity can impact divorce proceedings in some states, but it depends on how you want to move forward. Are you considering separation? I hesitated, my grip tightening on the phone. I don't know yet. Well, he said, if you choose to stay, you'll need to rebuild trust. That's not easy, especially when there are children involved. But if you choose to leave, We can discuss custody arrangements and asset division. I thanked him and hung up, feeling more lost than ever. What the hell was I supposed to do? Stay and try to fix a marriage built on lies? Or leave and risk destroying my family? I spent the rest of the day in limbo, scrolling through photos of Sherry and the boys on my phone, replaying memories that now felt tainted. Every smile, every kiss, every family outing. It was all stained by what she did with Greg. By evening, I made a decision. I confront her, not to scream or accuse, but to finally hear the truth. Because whether I stayed or left, I needed answers. I pulled into the driveway just after sunset, the house bathed in that dim orange glow that always reminded me of family dinners and bedtime stories. Tonight, though, it felt different, like the place I once called home had turned into a crime scene. I took a deep breath, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. It was time to face her. When I stepped inside, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The boys were at my mom's for the weekend. Sherry had arranged it earlier, probably hoping we'd have time to talk. She was sitting at the kitchen table, a cup of tea in front of her. Her hands shook as she wrapped them around the mug, and her eyes were puffy and bloodshot, like she hadn't slept in days. "Jack," she whispered, standing up when she saw me. "Sit down," I said, my voice colder than I intended. I tossed my keys onto the counter and pulled out a chair across from her. She sat slowly, like her body was on autopilot. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The silence pressed down on me, suffocating, but I wasn't going to be the first to crack. "I'm sorry," she finally said, her voice breaking. "I'm so sorry." "Don't," I replied, shaking my head. "I don't want to hear apologies. I want the truth." She swallowed hard, tears streaming down her face. "It started at the reunion. I hadn't seen Greg in years and we just connected. We talked about the past, about how different things were back then. I didn't plan for it to go this far. I swear." "How far did it go?" I asked, my jaw clenched. "Tell me everything." She hesitated, wiping her tears with the sleeve of her sweater. "After the reunion, we exchanged numbers. At first, it was just texts, harmless, or at least that's what I told myself. But then we met for coffee, and things escalated from there." "Escalated how?" I pressed, my voice rising. "Did you sleep with him?" "Yes," she choked out, covering her face with her hands. "It only happened a few times. I know that doesn't make it any better, but I need you to know that I didn't love him. It wasn't about him. It was about me." I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling as I tried to process her words. My stomach twisted, and I felt like I was going to be sick. "So what was it then? Was I not enough for you? Were you bored?" "No," she cried, reaching across the table, but I pulled away. "Jack, it wasn't about you. I've been feeling lost, like I'm not the person I used to be. Greg made me feel young again, like I was someone worth noticing." "Someone worth noticing?" I repeated bitterly. "I've noticed you every damn day for the last 15 years, Sherry. I loved you, supported you, raised our kids with you. But apparently that wasn't enough." Her sobs grew louder, and I had to look away before the sound of her crying broke whatever resolve I had left. "How long were you planning to keep this up?" I asked, my voice cold. "Or were you just waiting for me to find out?" "I wanted to stop," she said between sobs. "I was going to end it, but then he kept reaching out, and I was too weak to say no." I laughed, a hollow, bitter sound. "Weak?"
No, Sherry.
"Weak would have been telling me you were unhappy and asking for help. What you did was selfish." She flinched, like my words had slapped her across the face. I know I hurt you. I hate myself for it." I stood up, pacing the kitchen as I tried to calm down. The memories of us, our wedding, the birth of our sons, the lazy Sunday mornings spent tangled in bed, they all felt like lies now. How long had she been drifting away from me without saying a word? Finally, I stopped pacing and turned to face her. "Do you love him?" "No," she said firmly. "I love you. I never stopped loving you, Jack. That's why this is killing me. I betrayed the man who's given me everything. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to go back to the days when her love felt like the only thing that mattered. But trust isn't something you can glue back together overnight. I don't know if I can forgive you, I admitted, my voice barely a whisper. You broke something in me, Sherry, and I don't know if it can be fixed. She stood up, closing the distance between us. Please, Jack, don't give up on us. I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, counseling, anything. Just tell me you'll try. I looked into her eyes, searching for the woman I married. She was still there, hidden beneath the layers of betrayal and regret. But could I ever see her the same way again? I'm not making any promises, I said, stepping back. I need time, space, and if you really love me, you'll give me that. She nodded, tears streaming down her face. Okay, I'll give you whatever you need. I grabbed my bag and headed for the door, but just as I was about to leave, I stopped and turned back. One more thing, Sherry. If I find out you've been in contact with him, it's over. No second chances. I understand, she whispered. With that, I walked out, the weight of the world pressing down on my shoulders. As I drove away, I realized that this wasn't just about her betrayal. It was about whether or not I could rebuild the life I thought was unbreakable. And honestly, I wasn't sure if I could. I didn't go back to Mark's place that night. Instead, I drove aimlessly through town, the memories swirling in my head like a storm I couldn't outrun. The first time I saw Sherry across the college library. Our honeymoon in Hawaii, when we stayed up all night watching the sunrise on the beach. The day she told me she was pregnant with Ben, tears streaming down her face as she held the test in her shaking hands. Was any of it real, or had I been living in a fantasy? I pulled into a 24-hour diner, the kind with flickering neon lights and waitresses who called you honey, while pouring bottomless cups of coffee. I slid into a booth near the window, ordered black coffee, and stared at my phone. Sherry hadn't texted since I left. Maybe she was giving me the space I'd asked for, or maybe she was scared she'd push me over the edge if she said the wrong thing. Either way, the silence was deafening. I scrolled through my messages, stopping on the group chat with our mutual friends. No one knew yet. They were still sending memes and planning the next backyard barbecue, completely unaware that the foundation of our friend group was cracking beneath them. Mark had warned me not to tell anyone yet, but my fingers hovered over the screen anyway. I wanted to scream it to the world, to expose her and Greg for what they'd done. But what good would that do? The humiliation wouldn't heal me. It would just make the wound deeper. The waitress refilled my coffee, and I forced myself to think rationally. I had the upper hand. I had proof of the affair, and Sherry knew it. If I wanted to end this marriage, I could make the divorce brutal and leave her with nothing. But what would that do to the boys? They loved their mom. They didn't deserve to have their lives torn apart because of her mistakes. By the time the sun started to rise, I had made a decision. I wasn't ready to forgive her, but I wasn't ready to burn it all down either. I needed one final confrontation, this time with Greg. I found him easily enough. Social media made people predictable. His gym selfies, work check-ins, and weekend getaways were all there for the world to see. And luckily for me, he had a routine. Saturday mornings at the local gym, followed by a protein shake at the cafe next door. I parked across the street and waited. Sure enough, at 9 a.m. sharp, Greg strolled out of the gym, wearing a tank top that showed off his toned arms. He was exactly the kind of guy I'd expect Sherry to fall for when she was craving excitement. Charming, confident, and oozing with the kind of cocky energy that made me want to knock him out. I waited until he was halfway through his shake before walking up to his table. He looked up, confused at first, but when recognition hit, his face paled. Jack. Hey. Mind if I join you? I didn't wait for an answer. I pulled out the chair across from him and sat down, folding my hands on the table. Greg cleared his throat, shifting uncomfortably. Look, man. I didn't mean for any of this to happen. Shut up, I said, my voice low but firm. You don't get to explain yourself. I'm not here to listen to excuses. He clamped his mouth shut, his eyes darting around the cafe like he was searching for an escape route. But there was none. I want to make one thing clear, I continued. You stay away from my wife. I don't care if she calls you, texts you, or shows up at your door begging for attention. If you so much as think about contacting her again, you'll regret it. Greg nodded quickly like a kid caught stealing candy. I get it. I swear. It's over. I don't trust you, I said, leaning in. So here's what's going to happen. I have screenshots of every text, every photo, and a video of the two of you at the hotel. If you come near her again, I'll make sure those pictures get sent to your boss, your family, and every woman you'll ever try to date. Greg's face turned a sickly shade of green.
Jesus, man.
You don't have to do that. Don't make me, I warned. For a moment, he just stared at me, his chest rising and falling rapidly like he'd just run a marathon. Then he grabbed his protein shake, stood up, and walked away without another word. I sat there for a few minutes, letting the adrenaline wear off. Confronting him felt good, satisfying, even, but it didn't fix the problem. Sherry and I still had to figure out what came next, and that was the part one wasn't sure I could handle. When I got home, Sherry was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes swollen from crying. Where were you? She asked softly. Taking care of something, I said, dropping my keys on the coffee table. She didn't push for details, and I was grateful for that. I scheduled a counseling session for us, she said, her voice trembling. Just one session. If you don't want to go after that, I'll understand. I rubbed my temples, exhaustion washing over me. I don't know if therapy will fix this, Sherry. I know, she whispered, but I'm willing to try, even if it's just to hear you say goodbye if that's what you decide. The weight of her words crushed me. I had always thought of her as the strong one, the one who could hold everything together. But now she was broken and I was the one holding the pieces. I'll go to the session, I said finally, but I'm not making any promises. She nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. Thank you. We sat there in silence, the weight of everything between us pressing down like a tidal wave. I didn't know if we'd survive this, but for the first time since the betrayal, I felt like maybe, just maybe, there was a path forward. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Sherry. Sherry, I'm glad you came home. I know it'll take time, but I'll wait for as long as you need. I love you. I didn't reply. I wasn't ready to say those words again. Not yet. But as I closed my eyes, I realized that I wanted to try. I just didn't know if trying would be enough. The counseling session was more draining than I expected. Sitting across from Sherry, with the therapist guiding us, was like picking at an open wound. She confessed everything again. Her loneliness, her selfishness, and how she'd let things spiral. I said things I'd buried for years. How I felt taken for granted. How our marriage had become a routine. How blind I was to the cracks until it was too late. By the time it ended, I wasn't sure if we'd made progress or just reopened scars. But the therapist said something that stuck with me. Forgiveness isn't about erasing what happened. It's about deciding whether the relationship is worth rebuilding. When we got home, Sherry sat beside me on the couch, her fingers nervously playing with the hem of her shirt. Are you done with me? She asked, voice barely above a whisper. I stared at her, the woman I had loved for over a decade. The same woman who had torn me apart. There was no easy answer. But as much as I hated what she did, I knew the love wasn't gone. No, I said finally. I'm not done. But things are going to be different. You'll have to earn back my trust. And if I ever feel like you're slipping again, I'm walking away. Tears streamed down her face. But this time, I believed they were tears of relief. I'll do whatever it takes, she promised. We sat in silence, the weight of everything still heavy, but for the first time, the crushing pressure felt manageable. I didn't know if we'd survive this, but I was willing to try, and for now that was enough.